everybody. It is Red Hot Talk with Jimmy Cheng and Red Lawton. Welcome back. Yes, we missed a week last week, and we're going to have something else to talk to you as well because we're going to miss the next 2 weeks after this. So it's going to be a little bit of messy schedules that we have here. It's all because of me. Oh, please do blame me because I'm away for 2 weeks in Hong Kong, and we're just going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of today's show. Yeah, you've seen the title. We're going to have a little discussion about RAW and JPEG. And earlier this week or last week, I think, and I did a little poll asking how many of you use JPEG and how many of you use RAW, or which one would you prefer? And I get a overwhelmingly reply that most of you actually should both, which is quite interesting. So I'm definitely something that I would like to hear from you guys as well, to see some of the reasons behind. If you haven't seen the poll already, it's in my community page, and obviously there are still people giving the usual reasons that why they would prefer RAW over JPEG or vice versa. And we're going to share a little bit about our reasonings as well. And because there are times that you probably would like to shoot JPEGs, but also, and why I think JPEG is important for beginner photographers. And I think that's probably a little bit more appropriate. That's how I see it. But Rod may have something else to say. I can see he's squinting now. So he has something to say. So let's start off with Rod then. What do you see about RAW and JPEG? Because I know if you wasn't the one to say, I want the ultimate control of my images, you're gonna have, there's no way about it. It's always going to be RAW. But what's your view on both formats?
I shoot RAW all the time, but I've got a love-hate relationship with RAW files for a number of reasons. Some of them aren't very obvious. But I suppose the reasons why I like JPEGs and wish I could just shoot JPEGs is that you're saving a lot of work later. If you don't mind making the effort to get everything right in the camera, you're saving yourself some work later. But I also find that in general, cameras do a rather better job of processing their RAW files into JPEGs than you can easily do later on. So I know there are lots of arguments for using RAW files, and I'd certainly go along with those, such as you have more tonal depth later, not just for shadow and highlight recovery, but you can do some quite extreme contrast adjustments so you don't get banding or any other issues like that, and you've got full access to all the color data so you can shift the white balance this way or that way. I think those advantages are pretty obvious, but there are some disadvantages to RAW that are less obvious. And I suppose well, the thing that grates with me is that RAW files aren't actually images. The thing you see on your screen is how your particular software renders that particular RAW file. You haven't, with a RAW file, you haven't got an image you can share with somebody because it's only part processed. You can look at it, you can edit it, but only within that particular software application that you've chosen. And even then, your adjustments they're kind of latent. They're not real. They don't exist outside that software. So if you, with the JPEG, a JPEG will look the same everywhere. They're not so good for processing because they don't have the same tonal range or color depth, but they are universal. So if you open up a JPEG in Lightroom or Capture One or DxO or anything else, it will look the same. If you open up a RAW file in those programs, it'll look different every time. And what's more, what you see is only what you see. It doesn't necessarily represent what somebody else would see if they open that RAW file, because they'll have different software. So I just don't like the fact that RAW files are unfinished, and what you see is not always what you get.
What do you call it? And some people already call the RAW files being the digital negatives. And I can see the association with it, and because a negative is an exposed film that's not you can see it, but they just in the reverse, in the negative.
See, I don't think that's a very good comparison because negatives always look the same for everyone. I
Mm,
mean, how you make them into a print varies, but the negative has been processed.
yep,
That's what developers and fixers and chemical baths do. I
yep,
think raw files are more like undeveloped film, so that
mm,
your software set, whether it's Lightroom or Capture One or whatever, that's your
yep,
developer.
yep,
So
yep.
so this is why what you will get from a raw file is not the same as what somebody else will get with different software. And
Yeah,
it's so it does kind of tie it kind of the the other kind of part processed aspect I don't like is it ties you into your software. So if
it
you're a
does. Yes.
Lightroom user, chances are you've probably got about 10 or 20 or 1,000 or 30,000 images which have been adjusted in some way or another in Lightroom. Those adjustments only exist in your Lightroom catalog.
Yep.
They're not actual processed images. They're not finished. So I don't like this latent aspect of it. If you then looked
Mm,
at those same raw files in another program,
yep.
they wouldn't be processed.
It is quite
And
true.
if you lost your Lightroom catalog, heaven forbid,
Yep.
all your edits are gone.
Yes. Although you can
And you, you,
you can kind of
you
export it with the metadata, right? In which you can
yeah.
kind of for basic controls like contrast and all the others is
Well,
transferable to another program.
not it depends on how you approach it. If you're editing JPEG and TIFF images, you can embed Adobe's XMP processing data in those files. They will accept XMP data. If we're talking about raw files, you can't embed anything in a raw file. All you can do is leave an XMP file alongside
A
it,
sidecar file, yes.
sidecar file. But you don't. Not everyone will have Lightroom set up to do that. That is
Mm,
an option within Lightroom. I use it all the time because I just like the extra security of having that sidecar file.
yep.
But the issue with that is it's very easy to end up accidentally separating
Yep.
your raw files from your sidecar files. And also
Yep.
those sidecar files, for 90% of adjustments, they only make any sense to Adobe
Right.
software.
Okay. That's
Mm.
that's an interesting to see. I mean, I'm really seeing some people already saying that I should both, and yeah, do let us know. We all know the obvious of RAW, and to a lot of photographers, especially enthusiast level of photographers, they always consider JPEG as non-professional. And I can see why, because you can't further process your photo. I mean, all the effects, everything's baked in, the sharpening, whatever is already kind of already in the file, so there's so much you can do about it. And same as white balance and all the other stuff is it's very limited. There's only so much scope you can adjust the file to the way you may like eventually, unlike raw file. But I would like to hear from you. Why you think JPEG? Why do you use JPEG? Because I can see that I think alternate reality. One of his first comment was saying that you use JPEG as a check. And so you can check images. I think a lot of people do that. But if you shoot in camera, and even even you choose raw only as a recording medium, you always get a JPEG a kind of projections anyway. Where every time you play back, you actually play back a kind of like a JPEG rendering of the raw image. That's how the system sees it, or how the camera sees it, or render it so you can see the file, what the file looks like. So even when you bring it into Lightroom, the first file you see is actually the JPEG, a very tiny JPEG thumbnail that come out.
Only, well, I don't know whether your installation is different to mine. So for me, Lightroom has always insisted on creating its own previews. So there are programs which will just display the
Yep.
embedded previews of that the camera created, but Lightroom creates its own. And this is a bit disturbing when you look at
Mm.
the rendering on the back of the camera. If you only
Yep.
shoot raw, then
Yep.
you look in Lightroom and it's
Yep.
not the same, which is a
Yes.
tiny bit frustrating.
Yeah, when I input my images to Lightroom, the first thing it come up before, because the preview process usually takes a long time to do it to
Yeah,
finish,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and but before the preview finishes, and then you always see
yeah,
the JPEG thumbnail that pops up first. So that's the one that you would normally see behind the camera,
yeah,
and slowly when the processes are completed, then you see the
yeah,
previews from Lightroom,
yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, so it's always a bit weird and a bit of delay there.
but but I often find that the initial embedded preview display, I think, "Oh, that's all right." And then when I see the Lightroom version, I think, yeah, it's okay. I
Ah,
know that.
so that brings in a very interesting comment now. So like the JPEG may look even better than the render image from Lightroom.
Well, the thing is, I think most of us shoot for what we see on the camera. So you
Mm,
take a picture, whether you're shooting in RAW or JPEG or both, and you check it on the camera and you think, yeah, the color's right, the white balance is right, everything else is right. You don't, so you shoot with according to what the camera shows you while you're shooting. So
mm,
when you get back later and look at it in some other program and it's not quite the same, you might say, oh, it's better. Or you might think, oh, I wish it was the same.
yeah.
Um, so I think the potential with raw files is to make them better than the JPEGs, but I don't think you can say that immediately they're better. You have to do a bit of work. And I think often you have to do it in two steps. You have to do a bit of work to get
Yeah.
your raw file looking like the JPEG did, then a bit more work to improve on the JPEG.
So
Because
to ask you a
in-camera JPEGs are quite good, I think.
so to ask you a question, that will you use JPEG straight from the camera?
I have done, and I think there are times I'm going to do it in the future. So at the moment, I'm shooting a lot with EOS, an EOS RP, and an EOS R8. And if I compare the in-camera JPEGs with what I can achieve in Lightroom, I get two sets of results really. So there's no doubt that in Lightroom, I can recover shadow and highlight detail
Mm,
that is missing in the JPEGs, and I can make white balance adjustments I didn't make in camera. On the other hand, the cameras actually do a much better job of balancing noise and detail rendering. And also,
mm,
they have extremely good in camera lens corrections. So, if I shoot raw and then edit
yeah.
the raws in Lightroom, I kind of, it's swings and roundabouts. I get more dynamic range and color control. I don't get quite the same noise control and definition. And
No.
whoever thought that would happen, but it does.
Hmm.
Very often, if you compare your JPEGs and your RAWs, the JPEGs are better than you thought. I mean, obviously, if they're clipped, they're clipped. You can't fix it. But
Yeah.
um,
To
yeah,
to to give you an example, in the latest OM1, not so sure about the OM5, but the OM1, just an example. If you shoot very high ISO numbers like 6400 and above, the JPEG that coming out from the camera is actually slightly better. And in
yeah,
terms of how they somehow rendering the noise reduction and sharpening to bring out the details, then you try to process it yourself. And obviously, now with DxO Raw and all the other AI noise reduction softwares, you can almost get equal if not slightly better results than the in-camera. But then the in-camera noise reduction in higher ISO in the OM1 camera, I think they do use some sort of AI, so they do come out quite good. And to be frank, and so it's interesting, But then again, if JPEG has so many limitations, and why would camera company, especially from the pro level camera, still offer JPEG as an option? And I know it can be a backup, but then you have dual card slot. Why don't you save two copies of RAW instead of one RAW and one JPEG?
well, what if you're covering Olympics and the picture desk wants a photograph of the winner of the Tokyo Olympics 100-meter sprint? Tokyo? It's not Tokyo, is it? Wherever it is. And they want it that second. You
Yeah,
can't say, wait a minute, I just got to get my laptop and process the raw and get that nice looking and send it over. They want them straight away. So that's one respect. And also the
mm,
idea that JPEG is an amateur format. Can I just say, I know that it's not quite the same thing. Every photograph I submit professionally to publications, to websites, what have you, is a JPEG. I
Oh,
always have to end up with a JPEG. So for me, raw files they're a kind of workflow step.
yeah,
But that does make me quite aware of their limitations. And also, if I'm doing shots of accessories or camera gear or people doing things for tutorials,
yeah.
I shoot JPEG and RAW, but I always end up using the JPEGs because
Mm,
unless the lighting is particularly difficult,
yep.
the JPEGs are always fine.
Yeah, no,
So
I agree. I agree in some professional capacities, and if a journalist covering an event or something, yeah, that's totally. I mean, I've seen, journalists, event journalists actually, submitting photos live, remotely after the shoot. You literally hook up them to the camera to the computer, and the computer, it has a remote modem. So you basically everything they shoot is just go straight back to the press office, and the editor will just pick a frame and it's go straight into the website or the newspaper straight away. And yeah, I've seen how they set up, and they can be quite efficient. And JPEG obviously will probably be, it's more than sufficient, and also it's a lot smaller. Everything, you don't have to do anything, so long that you don't mess up with exposures or or white balance and make it horrible. And but I guess in those situations, they most likely leave the white balance in auto, ISO in auto anyway. So just a lot quicker to make sure you've got a little bit more consistencies there.
so I guess my question would be, obviously I realize there are situations where you need the flexibility of a raw file,
Mm,
but if you're in a situation where the JPEG has enough dynamic range
yep.
and you've got the white balance and the color right, why do you need the raw file?
Mm, that is true.
And,
And
and worse than that, if you're in a habit of shooting both or only shooting raw,
yep.
why are you processing all these raw files
Yeah.
when the JPEG might have been fine?
It is true. I'm not sure if you remember the very early days of digital photography, and I remember uh, uh, photo books that I buy. I mean, I wouldn't say photo books. I would say maybe tutorial books. How to teach people how to process digital images. I'm talking about way back, when it first started. So there are a lot of books, starting to come out with all these books. They're all talking about JPEG processing, not so much about raw processing. It's all about JPEG. Make sure you get your white balance correct. All the others, because we all know that if you shoot raw, white balance isn't a particular issue. You can readjust everything in post. And okay, Rod is going to have something to say. And but then again, I remember these early days. Is everything is all about JPEG processing. And it's
Yeah.
almost like they mix. It's a transition period, and then people are so used to film, developing film. You got to print and things like that. You almost get a fixed image. You're trying to enhance it a little bit here and there, not so much about transforming an image that we are seeing today. And digital photography has changed or come a long way since about 20-25 years ago now. So everything is becoming quite complicated. And Rod, you got something to say about the raw?
Well, different raw processors do all sorts of different things with white balance data. I've looked into this in some depth in the past, and you'll never get the same white balance from three different raw processors, and you won't get the same white balance the camera would have given you from a raw file,
Yep.
unless you do some quite extreme things with the color temperature and tint sliders. For example, the color temperature and tint settings in Lightroom barely correspond at all
No.
with those in the camera. And the Lightroom white balance presets, you might have daylight, you might have cloud, you might have shade and tungsten, all the presets you see on the camera, they do not deliver the same results the camera would have done using
No.
those presets.
No.
That's just one example. Um, Capture One is another example. It can give you a very close rendering of the camera's own white balance presets. But then when you see what it's doing with the temperature and tint sliders to do that, it's clearly using temperature and tint to bodge the color rendering. It's no use thinking, oh, I want a neutral white balance. I'll type in temperature 5200 and see if I need some tint. Not going to work. Not going to work because it'll be different for every camera. Some cameras it might work.
Yes.
Other
Yes.
cameras
Yes.
you'll have to do
Yeah.
stupid stuff like go up to 6,000 or down to 4,500 on the temperature.
Yes.
The only one I've used which appears to be accurate is GXO Photolab. I
Mm.
don't think that's a reason enough on its own for just using Photolab, but I think it just highlights that different software takes all sorts of liberties with white balance that you don't notice until you dig into the
Yeah. See, like,
details.
so this is the annoying things about raw editors and from different companies. That there's no
Yeah,
absolute
yeah,
standard anywhere. You know,
no,
it's all
no,
up to their own interpretations on
yeah,
what white is white, what color temperature 5500 is. You know, like they're all different. And then
yeah,
you got the differences between different camera brands as well. So all this complicate the whole thing. So like every
yeah,
time when I process an image, I'm just trying to find a neutral color, gray, neutral color, gray, neutral color, or just white spot. You're trying to pick a white color in the frame, trying
yeah.
to adjust it that way. And but now talk a little bit more extreme because I know a certain brand and. I would say Fuji, and then it's no harm saying it. And Fuji people always praise about the JPEG because the JPEGs are, supposedly the rendition of the older Fuji film negatives and positives. What do you think of that? Because obviously it's a craze, right? You know, when Fuji first launched their digital cameras, they specifically marketing this is a thing of Fujifilm cameras. You know, you shoot with those profiles and you can get this look like you used to shoot with those films, and it's kind of becoming like I wouldn't say a trendy thing to do, but certainly a lot of photographers that buy into it and buy into the system because they have the ability to look at those images from Reela, from the 400H, all the other popular Fujifilm negatives and positives before. So what do you think of that? And is it really is this a gimmick, or it is something that maybe can be potentially be useful?
I'd say it's the second thing, but I've had mixed feelings about. I know people rave over Fujifilm's film simulations, and if any company should know how to simulate film, it's Fujifilm because they used to make film. Um, I think some of them are quite good. Some of them are less good. As to whether they are accurate representations of what those films used to look like,
Yep.
I don't think that's the case. I think they're probably uh, they give a hint of how people think those things used to look. I
Yeah.
I was a massive Velvia fan, but Fujifilm's Velvia simulation isn't like Velvia, so I generally don't bother with it. Other things are quite nice. Like classic chrome is all right. It has a nice look to it, even though I've never once used a slide film that gave results
Yeah.
anything
Uh,
like that. So I think they're nice enough, but I'd much sooner shoot in RAW and
yep.
choose from 1,001 different profiles and presets and LUTs out there
Mm,
to get a particular look. I wouldn't try and get that look
right.
in the
Oh,
camera.
Rod. I'll be back in 5 minutes. My wife forgot the key, so she can't open the door.
Oh, and she wait.
All right, guys. I'll be back in 5. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, while Jimmy goes off on his mercy mission, I'll just have a quick look at some of the comments. So Andrew Bannon wants a high quality JPEG too. Definitely, definitely. I think one of the issues with JPEG it's just an 8-bit format. It's not very robust if you have to do any complicated tonal adjustments. I think it's about time all cameras shot. I never know how to pronounce this, but HEIF files. Is that HEIF? HEF? I don't know. But those are just as small as JPEGs or smaller still, but they can be 10-bit. So they seem to me to be the ideal in between format because it's it's a bit like using log profiles when shooting video. So you're deliberately shooting something with a very flat tonal range, so that you've got full shadow and highlight detail, and with the aim of bringing that out later in software. So it's a shame you can't do something similar with still photography. So it's a shame you can't have a kind of log profile for still images that let you compress a very wide tonal range into a regular image file. But this only works if you've got the bit depth to back it up. So even if you did have a very flat profile for JPEGs, JPEGs are only 8-bit. So if you then try to expand that and get a nice contrast and a choice of color renderings later on, an 8-bit JPEG just isn't robust enough to do that with. In the same way with video, if you have a video camera that has a log profile and you think, great, now I can get 15 stops of dynamic range, but it only saves 8-bit video, then your video is just going to break up in post when you try to exploit that full dynamic range. So for me, the problem is with cameras, we're stuck with between two extremes. We've got JPEGs, which aren't quite good enough, and RAW files, which are probably way better than we mostly need or always need. So like one's 5 megabytes, the other one's 50. One we can use straight away. The other one we have to run through our RAW processor. It'd be lovely to have something in the middle that was ready to use straight away, but had a bit more resilience when it came to editing. So Jimmy, how do we pronounce this? H-E-I-F. Do we say H-E-I-F? Heath.
Heath.
It's not Hive. I've been calling it Hive all this time. So it's Heath. What we need?
Idea. Yes. Yeah.
We need every camera these days to shoot 10-bit Heaths, and every photo editor to be able to open and edit them. And I think that would get us a lot closer to a file format that was ready to use, but still had some resilience when you come to edit it.
Yes, that's an interesting format, and but I don't know how long it would take for the camera manufacturer to catch on, and in using a Heath as a common kind of compressed files. So that would be interesting.
Yeah.
But I do agree about what you just said about breaking up, and if you've got a low bitrate file. I'm not sure how many of you do experience when processing compressed files, and especially in JPEG, like what Rod said, 8-bit. When you're trying to push the colors, and you often find that they will start to become blotchy in the images, because there's only limited informations in terms of color and color gradations and also exposures. So when you start pushing it, then you're starting to see the image starting to look a bit odd, because there's just simply not enough information for you to manipulate or push in that sense.
That's it. I mean, you notice it even if you've got a JPEG image which has captured all the highlight information in the bright sky, for example. If you then try and drag it back to make it really dramatic, you've probably only got 2 or 3 of the JPEG's bit range in the sky. It's probably only captured a handful of different tones. You won't notice until you start meddling with them. When you start meddling with them, you drive them further apart, and so you get banding in the sky, which is where you run into trouble with JPEGs.
And I'm sorry, I'm just reading some comments here. It's quite funny because Basil actually said an interesting comment here. Why more cameras don't just include a bunch more like nicer picture profiles? It's interesting because see, like all these digital camera manufacturers, they apart from Fujifilm, because they basically their picture profiles are the profiles for film simulations, but most other companies, they still have the same old picture profiles that they had like 25 years ago when they first started with digital photography. They haven't updated anything at all. They still have this really bizarre kind of like cartoon looking profile, or they have these very ultra high contrast look that basically completely outdated 10-15 years ago. And I don't know why they still include them or not updating them. It's almost like if left aside, been swept aside completely and forgot about them. And every time they release a new camera, they say, "Oh yeah, we need to include some picture profiles. Have you done anything with it?" No, we haven't. I'll just reuse them then.
I mean, it does seem crazy to me, whether you're shooting with Nikon, with Canon, or with Fujifilm, or with Sony. Typically, you'll have a standard profile.
Yeah.
You'll have a vivid profile. You'll have a portrait or a faithful profile. The thing is that if you like the vivid look, well, you could just shoot in a standard profile and just give the saturation or the contrast a bit of a hike.
Yep.
Any JPEG will be able to stand that, and it only needs a tiny adjustment to
Yep.
replicate the looks of all the others.
Yep.
It just seems unnecessary and dated. And I suspect one of the brands you're thinking of, Jimmy, might perhaps include some art filters with its cameras. Now, I would say that of the many art filters in my cameras, let's say there are 20, I
Yep.
think probably 5 of them are quite good. And I'm not saying that to be sarcastic. I actually do, and that's not bad for me to find any in-camera looks that are worth using. I think it's comparatively rare, but it's all a matter of taste, isn't it? What
It
I
is.
like, other
It
people
is.
won't. What other people like, I might not
Yeah.
like. But this is the thing when it comes to in-camera looks. I do worry about committing to a look.
Yep.
I think you can very often shoot a JPEG, and there's still enough headroom with a JPEG file to choose a different look later. And
Yep.
I think that's what I'd rather do.
Okay. Well, I do like some of the profiles, but they're all in black and white. I do like the contrast, high
Yeah, all the black
contrast.
and white, yeah, they're all good. Yeah,
I think
yeah,
most of the black and white presets or picture profiles or whatever you call it, art filters,
yeah.
and
Art
they should be quite good. And I do use them on my Pen F when I do street
Yeah,
photography. I just set that to
yeah,
high contrast look. Just kind of like mimic a pushed film back in the days when I used to shoot these street photography, and I wanted the ultra high contrast look, and I would just basically push the film, shoot at 400 but process in 1600, that kind of thing. And so with the picture profile, I can almost kind of get that back without having to do too much of it. And
yeah.
so in that instance, I do use JPEG a lot. But now go back to the a little bit of a conversation that we had earlier. Oh, Robin Wong is in the house. Hi, Robin. And why I think JPEG is good for beginner. And because I very often I found that a lot of young photographers or beginner photographers, when they want to learn more about photography, and they first of all they bought themselves they buy themselves a pretty nice camera, decent cameras that can output raw files so you can manipulate or process and edit later. But the thing is, they literally started running before they know how to walk. So by means of they literally start going straight to raw processing without understanding actually anything about what raw file does or what can it do. And in that case, you quite often find that they overprocess the raw files, and they didn't know certain parameters, what each of the sliders does in the programs, and so they're not really maxing out what the raw file actually can give you. And so I actually think, for young photographers and beginner photographers, the first thing they need to do is actually learn how to shoot. So that means that you need to make sure they're correct exposures, make sure your framing is good, make sure you can execute the shots, the timing is right. You're holding the camera, the stance of holding the camera, everything is all part of the learning process. But JPEG or RAW doesn't really come into until much later point, because if you can actually expose the photo correctly in the first place, set the right balance correctly in the first place, you don't need too much work, unless you are looking for a master shot. But then you shouldn't be looking at those type of shots unless you're already quite experienced in what you're doing. So I think in the beginning journey, I think JPEG is actually pretty good because it gives you less things to think about, and you should just basically trust the camera's renders and how the images in JPEG form to look like, and when you shoot the whatever in front of the camera, so you get an idea. Oh, yeah, I did expose this correctly, or oh, I did frame it okay. The color's okay, because the white balance. You need to learn all about the color temperature and everything before you start messing around the slider in post afterward. Because if you don't understand what white balance is, and then color temperatures, what tint is, all the other different parameters, when you go straight to the raw program, any raw program, you'll be so confused, and you'll be trying to mess around with it, and then ultimately your image is going to look probably worse than what the JPEG would have done in the camera.
No, you're quite right. I think when you're learning something, the last thing you need is more variables and more uncertainty.
Yeah.
I think JPEGs are ideal because what you shoot is what you get.
Mm.
And let's not forget that the raw files only give you a little extra headroom.
Yep.
You still have to get the exposure right, and
Yep.
you still need to think about the white balance. I think it's very
Yep.
easy to fall into the trap of thinking a raw file can fix everything. Well, it certainly can't. So
Yep.
from the point of view of exposure, I usually reckon you might have an extra maybe 3 or 4 stops in the shadows that you can dig out if you must, or if you need
Yes.
to.
Of course.
Maybe an extra stop in the highlights that you can recover,
Yep.
that you wouldn't have had from the JPEG. As far as white balance is concerned, I think it can actually raw files can actually lead you astray. It's very easy to look at the scene and say, "Oh, the light color's all over the place. I'll fix it later." Maybe you can't. Maybe what you should be saying is, I need some extra lighting. I need to figure this light out and make it work right
Mm.
here on the spot, rather
Yep.
than imagining I can fix anything later. So I
Yep.
think white balance and color. I think it's very easy to imagine raw can get you out of anything.
Yes.
But if you start thinking that way, you might start being lazy at the time of taking a shot.
Yep.
And you might not be doing things that are actually necessary to make the shot work. If that made any sense.
Of course it does. And just to give an example as well, since Robin's in the house, and his first comment here is that he should raw most of the time, obviously, but for events, because he needs to deliver JPEGs immediately, and he uses JPEG. So this highlights the importance of the photographer understanding of everything we just talked about. So if you really understand how to take a photo correctly, exposures, white balance, everything set correctly, a JPEG is perfectly fine for deliverables, especially for non-technical presentations. And like Rod and I earlier talked about, if you're a journalist or sports, you need to submit a photo straight away to the press office, and basically immediate delivery. JPEG is totally fine. But imagine if the photographer themselves cannot shoot properly in the first place, so all these JPEGs going to be really horrible because they will be in wrong white balance, over, underexposed, and it's nothing you can do about them because it's already baked in. So whatever you sent out is how it's going to look like. So, Robin is obviously a very experienced photographer, so he know and understand how to correctly take a photo. So that's what I'm trying to say, and if you're a beginner, it's always going to be easier. I think it's easier for you to learn shooting JPEG first, because that's what what you should trust your eyes. If the picture look too bright, that means you're overexposing it. Don't think that RAW can get you out of trouble. Like Rod said, I can bring down exposure in post because it's RAW. I can do this and that. I can recover this. I can push the shadow. It doesn't work that way if your image is already overexposed by 3 stops or 5 stops. There's so much you can recover in highlight. And so you ultimately still got a bad image. It's not going to be a great image. So if you learn using JPEGs, so you can understand first of all, how the camera behaves in the exposure system, because every system is different. Some are slightly over, some are slightly under. You just have to learn how to deal with it. And lenses, sometimes the lenses also have some effects as well. Some are slightly high contrast, some is slightly lower. It just really depending what sort of thing you're shooting. I'm not trying to get into all these complications here, but you know what I mean. There's a lot to learn about photography. But when you come in, trying to be as simple as possible. Learn about exposure triangle, learn about color temperature, learn about how to read the lights in front of you, how to maximize whatever in front of it without going crazy. And that's the best advice I would give to any beginner photographers. I think that's probably the easiest way to digest, rather than just go straight to full manual mode, full, raw shooting. You might get yourself into trouble because you may not fully understand what each of those little items actually means or do.
When you're learning anything, you need to keep all the variables to a minimum, don't you? So
Mm,
if you just take the approach to what you capture is what you get, and that's an end to it, that concentrates your mind on what you're doing. But I think that shooting raw can tempt even expert photographers into laziness. So I'm just going to imagine a hypothetical situation
mm,
where maybe you're photographing somebody next to a window, and they're looking a bit, their face is a bit underexposed,
yeah,
but you've got the exposure through the window and what's outside is more or less all right. The raw shooter's approach would be, that's fine, I've shot raw, I'll bring a face out in my raw software. But if you go back to basics, a photographer of the old days would say, oh, I need some more light. So they'll move them closer, or they'll
yeah.
change the angle, or they get a reflector. That is actually the correct solution. So by trusting too much to raw files,
Yeah.
I think we can often get a lot lazier about making the pictures good in the first place.
Or more important, or more commonly mistake people make is that when a company say they have 15 stop dynamic range, they think they can shoot anything in any sort of lighting condition because they know they have 15 stop dynamic range to kind of get them out of trouble. So let's say if you've got a backlit subject and the subject in front or behind, the sun is behind the subject, and you got like, if you want to still capturing this the sky above it and the sun and the subject and everything in perfect balanced exposure, you're not going to get it even with raw file, because the subject is so dark in the front. Even you're trying to push a shadow, it's going to look horrible no matter how you look at it, because the sensor may have like 15 stop dynamic range, but if the sensor can't see the color properly, the color is still going to be very weird. And because when it's dark, it can only capture certain things. If you turn it into monochrome mode, it may still have some effects, but then if you're doing color, pure color, I think you often find that you may be in a deep trouble when you shoot that kind of scenarios, because I shoot a lot of outdoor portraits, so I know how this sort of thing usually works. I don't usually carry lights, because it's an extra thing to carry, so I'll try to work my subject into a certain light angle to make sure that I can get the best out of it. But if I can't, yes, in that particular case, I will try to utilize, some post-processing skills to bring it back up. But
Well, you
I'll
have to
still,
sometimes, yeah.
yeah, I still wouldn't say that I would fully trust what the raw can give me ultimately to what I want to see, because if something's underexposed, it is underexposed, and then and there's limited information that's been captured by the sensor in terms of color informations. Then that means if you're trying to recover the skin tones and everything, you may find that they look horrible, because either going to be very yellow, very green, because the information you're missing, because they're in the shadow, they're in dark, so you can't really see too much of it. And what that means that you need light. So like Rod said, reflector, or actually putting artificial light, putting a field flash, these are only way you can bring the colors back up to see a more balanced exposure for the entire frame. And so that's very, very good tips there. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think you have to make the photograph work in the camera. If you trust too much to what you can do later, you're not necessarily starting from the right position. You won't necessarily make a good photograph. And I think that how much detail you can bring out of shadows, that definitely varies from one camera to another. So with my OM gear, I can pull quite a lot back, but it does get noisier, and it gets the detail. It loses a little detail. It's only so
Mm,
far you can go. Um, I have an EOS R8, which has got very good deep shadow detail. You can do a lot with that. I have an EOS RP, which has dreadful shadow detail. It falls to bits very quickly. What else have I used? I've used Sony A7R2, which is very good at shadow recovery. You can take a lot of liberties with that. But I've used Panasonic G9, where it's good until it gets to a point when suddenly everything goes magenta. So
Mm.
it just varies from one camera to another. But I think relying too much on raw processing rather than figuring out how to make the image work as it is,
Yeah.
I think that's the danger. That's the
Yep.
danger. And it's also easy to end up taking a whole bunch of raw files home thinking I can fix these, and then you find you can't. And you wish you could, go back and shoot it slightly differently, but it's too
Yep.
late.
Yep. Absolutely. I'm just looking at some comments here. Uh, Here, Chris here. For boosting ISO for low light, bad lighting is bad lighting, and no digital magic can fix it. And this is exactly the point. I think another thing that we can talk about, I know it's slightly outside of the RAW and JPEG subjects here, but then, you know, you need to learn about light, a photographer, and that's all it is, because light is photography. Without light, there's no photography, full stop. And very often people would think about, oh, I need high dynamic range, I need clean high ISO performances, I need this, I need that, but these doesn't give you better image. If you look at a lot of fine art photographer, they make sure their images are when they come off of the camera, it have the highest possible quality in terms of data, so they can process them properly. So high ISO, first of all, you won't get that, and then bad lighting, you won't get that. And so all these little elements there is go back to the basics of photography. You still have to make sure that you got the correct light. You have to, set up the scene, or you look at the scene correctly. You have to go to the place in the correct time of the day to photograph it. You can't think about, you go in like 12 p.m. noon. You think that you can capture the beautiful landscape shot. That's not going to happen. But you think that, oh, I can have the dynamic range, can talk. I can have I can bring down the highlights. I can bring all the cloud back in. I can maybe even use Lumina to change the sky. And but these aren't really, to me anyway, it's not really photography. It's more digital manipulations. And to me, I mean, I like to see how people actually capturing the photos, do everything in camera. Yes, you still process the photo, but only to enhance what your vision gives you, in how you think about the photo should look like, more than you're transforming a shot from one to another. And I'm not saying that's wrong. There are digital artists which are doing exactly that, but I'm not a digital artist. I'm a photographer, so I'm a very different breed altogether. So as from a photographer's point of view, I think I would like to see most of the stuff done in camera. Then I just use processing to enhance the photos to what I like to see or present it to my client or to myself.
I think as well, if you get things right in the camera, you're going to end up with a better raw file, because if you go to some effort to get the exposure right, then you're going to have to do less recovery in your raw processor. You've got a better raw file to start with. And Basil Tiffany makes an interesting point further on the comments. He says, I've seen pro event photographers deliver JPEGs they didn't white balance. Yeah, for sure. This is so easily done. If we always shoot raw, we think, white balance, who cares? Don't bother. But the thing is, if you don't, first of all, you'll have a bunch of JPEGs that will all have different color rendering. That's not great if you've got to give your clients pictures on the spot. And I'm not talking about the difference between being indoors and outdoors. I'm talking about very similar shots. So you can be out of doors. You've got a couple standing in front of some trees, and then you've got a couple, they move slightly and they're standing in front of, say, some mountains. Your camera's going to think, oh, I'll give that white balance a little tweak because something's changed. So you get two shots that should have the same white balance that don't. And the other thing is, if you leave the white balance to your raw software, you're still going to get home,
Yeah.
and it's still going to have 1,000 raw files with different white balance settings. You've still got to fix it. And it would have been a bit easier to do it in the camera, so that when you got home, all you had to do, all your raw files, you just leave your white balance on as shot, the job's done. Instead of having to go to select them all and choose the white balance preset and then figure out, oh no, wait a minute, some of these are indoors, I need a different one for that. So much easier to do it when you shoot. rather than thinking RAW is like a magic bullet. It kind of
Yes.
is, but it's often a very slow solution for a problem you could have fixed quite easily on the
Yep.
spot.
And absolutely, that's why like, I don't trust auto white balance.
No.
And it can give you all kinds of results, and it's just horrible. And I found that the hard way, when I first started digital photography, and when I thought, company were raving about the auto white balance being accurate and this and that. So I took the bait, I set it to auto white balance and did a complete wedding with it, and it was all over the place. It's like one scene, like you said, a dance floor. It would have been the same colors, and it shouldn't be
Yeah.
changing. And in fact, there was like 20 different temperatures and tints in there all over the
Yeah.
place when I come to look at the raw photos, and it's just creating more work for me afterwards. And then
Yeah.
I have to spend time fixing one photo, making sure that it looks correct. Then I apply that temperature and tint to all the other images, and it's just a mess. It's just a mess in general. But yeah, it's quite easy just to fix a white balance, and if you're really in doubt, just fix it in 5500, just to do a daylight, and
Yeah.
that
Daylights. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and that should be easy. And then and if you want it slightly warmer, just slightly warmer in pose is not too difficult. But if you fix it, it just makes your life so much easier. And then even when you're viewing the images, they will give you a heart attack when you look at the images. Oh wow, they all look different.
I think this is very important for session photography where you've got a bunch of pictures that need to work together. I think there's only one time when I would voluntarily use white balance also white balance in preference to anything else is night shots in a city or very mixed lighting where I'm only taking one photograph. So this is the issue with white balance. Is fine if you've
Yeah,
only got one light source. If you've got 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, if you pick one of them, then 5 of them are going to look wrong. But I usually find that if you leave it on auto, it
yeah,
picks something in the middle, which is kind of all right. But this only works if you're doing a single shot. If
yeah,
you're doing a sequence, you need
yeah.
to fix it. Otherwise, you're going to have to fix it later, and it'll take a lot longer.
Absolutely. It's quite an interesting comment I just find out here, and I don't know how to pronounce the name, sorry. It's out of my depth here. But anyway, it's a good comment. Why video move quickly to H265 codec, but camera can't move past JPEGs to something else? But
Heave, hive,
Heave, yes. Sorry, I think someone, Basil, did mention that heave is actually a very rude way to
listen.
apparently, and sorry about that if it did upset some people, and but I only learned it from how people pronounce it online. To be quite honest, I have no idea how to actually pronounce it. Maybe just HEIF, just spell it out, and
Yeah.
but I think a lot of Americans just pronounce them heath, and for some reasons, and. But anyway, that's besides the point. But having said that, you talk about video codecs here. It did take the video sector quite a long time to adapt to H.265. Yeah, it may happen in the slightly more higher end stuff, but consumer level cameras didn't actually have H.265 until pretty recently. If you look at how the camera developments, I don't know, 4 or 5 years maybe in H.265, and I'm not talking about dedicated video cameras like the Panasonic GX series or Blackmagic. They already have all kinds of codecs you can choose, but a lot of the consumer level cameras just simply don't have it. Even now, if you look at a lot of the slightly lower end cameras, like beginner level cameras, and if you look at the video codecs, they don't have H.265. They still have other older codecs and older containers. So I don't think they're moving quick enough still, and but they are definitely a little bit quicker than the still side, which means still JPEGs. But yeah, it's the way it is. I think that in a way, I guess a lot of camera manufacturers, I wouldn't say that they're lazy, but I think that they think that there's no need for it in a way for compressed files to be standardized or improved, because they think that if you are serious about photography, at some point you're going to move away from JPEG and into RAW anyway. So why do I need to give you a better compressed format? And while JPEG is probably more than sufficient for a lot of the deliverables we just talked about, sports, newspaper, they don't need more sophisticated compressed files, I guess.
So it turns out my EOS R8, I'm just going through the menus. It can shoot HEIF files. So does my phone. However, my phones are only 8-bit, so that gets me nowhere. I'm gonna have to find out. I'm gonna have to find out more about the EOS R8. I might give that a go. If that shoots 10-bit HEIF files, that could be quite interesting, but I don't know
Do
as yet.
do
But
do tell me how it looks.
well, I imagine it looks like a JPEG, probably. I don't know. I'll try and find out. But this has been tiresome for so long. I mean, JPEGs are not quite good enough. Raw files are far too weighty, and who really needs to that extra workflow overhead later?
Mm,
We it would be much better to have a higher quality
yep.
processed file. Um, and I know for a long time, older cameras used to offer TIFF files, say 8-bit or 16-bit TIFFs. But honestly, if you thought raw files were big, don't save a 16-bit TIFF. I'm not even sure that cameras that shoot TIFFs can do 16-bit TIFFs. And then
No, don't
the
think
other
so.
issue
No.
is that if you then capture a processed TIFF, you're just going to end up with the same limitations as most of the same limitations as a JPEG. So you're going to have restricted dynamic range you can't recover, and you're going to be fixing the white balance in a way that you can't fix later. So it
Yeah.
seems to me that the TIFF format is not really much of an answer. But if somebody could figure out a way to do HEIF files with a kind of log profile that gave them an extended dynamic range that you could actually recover,
Yeah.
that would be great. But
So that's the thing about like camera development these days, and we all talk about like AI this and AI that, like, oh, it recognizes face and this, all kinds of things. Why can't they improve the white balance? And we talked about all this stuff. You talk about how these clever things can do now. Why can't a camera
it's
can be like human eyes? We adjust the color temperatures, like perfectly.
it's because the camera doesn't know. It doesn't know what you want, so it has to guess, and it'll always, well, not always, but it will often guess wrong. And the camera, I think one of the issues is the camera doesn't know when you're shooting a session
Mm.
or when you're shooting individual images. The camera assumes every image is individual, and it tries to recalculate everything for every shot you take.
Yep.
If there is some way of flicking a switch from single images to session shots, and then fix your settings for the first shot, and then for the rest of that session the camera's not going to mess with anything, that could be useful, as long as you could remember to switch it off again afterwards. but this is the issue, that the camera is just guessing at what it thinks you might want. And if for most kind of basic beginner photography,
Yep.
that might work
Yep.
out all right. But the more we know about photography as we progress, the
Mm.
more we realize the camera is making the wrong decisions. I mean, it stops us making stupid mistakes.
It's
But
almost like we are creating problems ourselves.
well, only in the end, only we know what we want.
Yes.
And if we imagine that any amount of AI can figure that out for us, well, I think we've been a bit lazy, really, to be honest. If it's like anything, if you don't use it, it'll go away.
Yep.
So if
Yep.
you don't use your own intelligence, maybe it won't be there when you go looking for it.
No. Basil has a question here. I wonder if we'll eventually just shoot video and cut stills later, maybe with AI. I hate the thought. It's already happening. And well, Panasonic had what they call was it the photograph mode, photograph, whatever they call it, and
4K
basically
photo or 6K photo. Yeah.
So basically, from 4K video clips, you can extract an basically 8 megapixel still out in from the frame or from a frame of your choosing. And but you have to be a little bit more careful when you're looking at video and extracting frames out. It's not so much about AIs and things like that, but it's about how you film. Usually in filmmaking and videoing, you want motion blur, the correct motion blur to reflect how human eyes see things. So that means that in any given instances, you may actually see blurring effects, so you may not actually get a clear frame. So if that's what you want, is that's the kind of aesthetic you are going for, some sort of motion blur, that's totally fine. But if you want to freeze a frame, like what you normally do for high speed shooting, let's say a footballer kicking the ball, that may not actually happen. Maybe it could if you're having a ultra slow motion setup in the camera, but you're talking about like 120 frame and above to be able to freeze a frame properly. And also depending on how the subject is moving as well. If they're moving really quick, you probably need even higher frame rate to be able to freeze a frame and extract that out from the video clip. And otherwise, all you see is going to be blurring, the actions and from the foot, from the legs or whatever. So that means that they may not be usable. So it's still a very, very different thing altogether between videos and stills. But I can see the usefulness of it, by extracting a frame out and from videos, because I actually often I actually do that a lot for my thumbnails and my videos. I just extract a frame out from the video and just do the thumbnail from there. And so I do use that kind of features, and it's not a difficult thing to do. You just go into a program, just to, go to the frame that you want and just export that out from the editor. So it's not the difficult thing to do. But Panasonic did that for years now for this kind of photo modes, and you can grab out from the frame. And I think there are other cameras who do similar things as well.
Well,
I guess it's useful.
I think you could probably do it with most video editors anyway. But I think the principal issue with grabbing frames from video is that with video, as you said, Jimmy, you're doing a different thing. You need quite long exposure times per frame to get the persistence of vision that makes video look fluid. Whereas if you're using video to grab action, you actually want very fast shutter speeds to freeze the action. And with when you shoot regular video or use regular video modes, you don't have that control over the shutter speed. You might be able to. There's probably ways of getting about it, but you'd have to choose a video mode where you have either manual exposure or shutter priority mode, where, for example, with soccer, you really need an exposure of around a 6/40th of a second to capture movement, ideally for soccer players. That is not the kind of control that video modes typically give you. So if you try to grab a frame from a video of a soccer match, you're going to find that if it's done the way the camera would do it, you're going to have quite a lot of blur.
Yeah.
If you're using an iPhone which doesn't have aperture control, it will tend to use quite fast shutter speeds anyway. It might work, but then the other issue is that the consumer cameras don't use quite destructive compression that works for videos, but doesn't work so well if you need to extract a single frame. Because only about, I don't know, you could tell me, Jimmy, it depends on the settings, I suppose. But with consumer video codecs, only one frame in five is a key frame, which is a whole image frame. All the others in between, they are simply showing differences to that key frame. So if you try and extract a frame from video, it's going to have to do some quite complicated jiggery pokery to assemble a frame from keyframes and what do they call them? iframes, is it?
Is the iframe,
or something else?
Yes. Yep.
So you're not video unless you shoot with all eye compression, which you only get on more advanced cameras, and it's very processor and space intensive. Unless your videos are all eye, they're not made of individual frames. They're made of keyframes and bits in between.
the method they use just to save file size, because you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
imagine basically
yeah,
you're shooting frame by frame, and it could be huge,
yeah,
and
yeah,
even in compressed form, and they are still massive depending on the
yeah,
resolutions of the camera, and you can imagine even 4K. So you talk about 8 megapixel stills, but if
yeah,
you're shooting like 25 frames per second, even 25 seconds, we're not even talking about slow mos. So every
yeah,
second you're capturing 25 images, and then
yeah,
imagine if you shoot 3-4 minutes long clips, and how many photos you're actually capturing. So the
yeah,
files can be massive. And
yeah,
so to get away with that, they're using all these kind of basically interpolating frames in between. So have keyframes every so often,
yeah,
and fill in
yeah,
between, and uh,
yeah, yeah,
and just to save files. That's all. And you can imagine if you shoot raw videos, and that's why if you go for raw video, and you need terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of storage just to store, a few minutes of footage.
yeah,
We're talking about 4K, not even 8K and all the other ultra high resolution stuff,
yeah,
and uh, and that's why like no one really trying to shoot raw in 8K and things like that, unless you're a high-end production
yeah,
in the Hollywood movies and things like that, because
yeah,
every average consumer, even professionals, just simply don't have access to that kind of resources to store these things and process them in post. It's just not feasible, and so you're still relying on compressed format a lot, and because they are a lot
yeah,
easier to deal with, a lot easier to edit, and obviously save a lot of space, so you don't have to carry like terabytes or hard drives or whatever and next to you. Yeah, it's very different ball game altogether compared to from video to stills. There are a lot of common factors, but then once you get past that, and the technical side of it can be quite tricky.
I think Basil's point there is fair that if we'll eventually just shoot video and cut out stills later, maybe with AI, well, I suspect that we won't, as in the people here. But this is already happening. This is a very popular approach, but it's content, I think, of a different kind for a
Hmm.
different kind of audience. Um, I don't know whether we should be worried about it or not, but I think that this kind of approach can get very striking looking images or images of a
Yeah.
kind that please a certain sort of audience. But
It's
the trouble with the AI is you're not going to get a personal interpretation. You're going to get an algorithm's interpretation. So AI might be very good at generating images that most people like, but it won't necessarily be any good at creating images that you will like, or that
Yes.
will advance the art of photography, or kind of move people's perceptions. AI
Yeah.
is just a crowd. It's just a crowd pleasing tool, really.
It. I mean, I think it's an interesting topic. Maybe we'll discuss it next time.
We've done AI, haven't we? We've done AI.
We have, but then it's gone more now. You must have heard of the latest Google Pixel phone, right? Is the you can basically change the images in a way that every frame is perfect, by means of if you take a sequence of group photos, and when you take group photos, always got one looking in another direction, one blinks or whatnot. It's always very difficult to get a group shot where everybody's smiling correctly, like all open their eyes, all looking into the camera. So Google has somehow got this AI thing going. So when you shoot that with a Google phone and in sequence, all this, well, you have to enable it to press it, and all these photos sent to the cloud. The cloud will analyze all the all the individual photos in the sequence, and find the individual faces, making sure they're all looking at the camera, all smiling, no blinking, and they reassemble a photo with all these faces correctly looking at the camera. So what Google's AI is doing is perfecting the image for you. So that takes away that the skill from the photographer, in a way, the timing, or trying to call people, making sure they're all looking in the same directions. You can literally keep pressing the button, take 5,000 photos, and then let the AI deal with it later. That's the extreme, but then you get what I mean.
It sounds like a perfect image according to a certain type of definition, though, because from all the times I spent looking through people's wedding albums and family photos, it's always the unexpected and the odd and the silly that they like, not the perfect. So
Yep.
if Uncle Fred just happens to be unfortunately picking his nose when he took the group shot, or looking over to one side, or doing something else, that's part of the memory.
Yep.
Everything being perfect is not necessarily a memory. It's
Oh, of course, yes. But then again, that's what Google is driving, or at least they are advertising
yeah.
the technologies behind it. But then again, let's go back to what we're trying to say maybe next time, is that the AI now is moving to the directions that is into the consumer level now. We already had Lumina, Neo, all the other software that we can kind of manipulate the sky. We now have generative AI in Photoshop and all the others, kind of like we basically redo the whole photo for you if you really want to. And all these are happening left, right, and center now. But now going to the phone, when people are just ordinary people taking snapshots, have almost access to regenerative AI, changing AI, whatever AI you want to call those things, and then to create general snapshot for you in camera. And that is kind of nuts. But that may be actually damaging photography, I think, in general, because people are thinking that, oh, I took a bad shot, or they think they took a bad shot, but then they thought, oh, I can fix it in post. I can edit it in post, and the AI will fix it. I don't care about that, and I don't know. Then people may start to think, oh, photography is all about editing. Photography is all about the AI will fix it later. Not so much about you actually standing there waiting for the moment to happen, or you reading the light correctly, or you wait for the sun to come out, or you wait for the rain to stop, getting the dramatic sky. You don't have to worry about that anymore, because I could do it in post. Everything can be in post.
It's whether you want to create images from your imagination or from external reality. For a lot of people, external reality isn't quite good enough, and they think their imagination is better. It depends on how you feel about the whole process of image making and the
Yeah.
images you want to capture. But I think if we drag this back a little to this whole business of RAW versus JPEG,
Yep.
I think in a way that's the thin end of the wedge, because we're trusting a manipulative process with our image, rather than trying to capture an image that actually exists in front of us.
Yep.
So by shooting raw, we're thinking, I think I can turn this into something much better. That itself is a slightly dangerous step if you're the sort of photographer who thinks that what you see is what you should photograph. So I don't think AI is necessarily the villain in all of this. I think perhaps what we should be considering is just how much we want to change and modify what was there. I'm not saying you shouldn't or that you should. But I do think it's a question we should ask ourselves in a kind of roundabout way. I think we probably need to ask that with JPEGs and RAW files, because if you shoot a JPEG, what you get is what you're stuck with, but it's what was there. We usually shoot RAW files with the idea of, I can make this better. And that is one step towards changing what we photographed. Is that too extreme? I think it's worth thinking about.
It is definitely. I mean, it's resonating the tones that we spoke about earlier. About why beginner photographers should look at JPEG more than RAW, and because you are fixed with that frame. You're freezing that frame that in front of you. You're not supposed to be changing it. And I agree. I mean that's why I loved photography in the first place. I got into photography because I could freeze the time. I could freeze that space at the time I pressed the shutter button. And I don't like the fact about changing realities. And obviously, cropping is another thing that is a different ball game altogether, because by cropping an image you could completely change the narrative of an image.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about that. But we talk about actually manipulations by removing or adding subjects or objects into the frame, and that could be something that a lot of young modern digital photographer may like to do, because it's kind of fun, right? You can have a generative AI to add stuff, remove stuff, and changing the background altogether. It's kind of fun. But I guess what you meant completely makes sense there. For me, like I said earlier, RAW is for me to capture the image. I can process and make it better than what I could potentially get from a JPEG image. Not so much about actually changing everything.
Yeah. No, I know, but I guess one point is that how can you learn about light if you can always change it later? So if you are learning about light, it is a very important thing for photographers. If you shoot JPEGs, you have to work quite hard to get it right, to make sure you understand it, because there's limited potential for fixing it later. If you shoot RAW, is there a danger that you're going to look at the scene and say, nah, I'm not, it looks wrong, but I'm not worried, I can fix it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, to give you an example, if you shoot portrait, let's talk about a very basic, simple composition where you have the subject right next to the window. So using window light to cast to cast onto the subject's face to create the definitions there. A simple shot, beautiful shot that I always use in brides and bridal shots, and any sort of portraits. It's very easy to do, very nice. And but imagine the subject is facing away from the window, so he or she's face will be in the dark. And because you shoot RAW, you think that, I could change it. I could brighten the face up, but they will look completely wrong because the light is not coming from one direction. And by messing around with the edits at the end, it literally destroying the photograph. Because first of all, if you do somehow manage to brighten up the face to the point that it looks real, but then the light is in the wrong angle because light is coming out from the window, not from the inside of the room.
It never looks as good as if you just put a reflector under their chin or to one side. That instantly looks great, but it means going to a bit more trouble. And I think there's a bit of a movement away from taking any trouble over photography. I think people, I think in the broadest possible sense, they just want to turn up, point their camera in roughly the right direction, and not have to do anything, and hope that AI can make everything good for them. It doesn't take a lot to improve a photograph on the spot, but I think there's a general rejection. I've met all that extra photographic
or convenience. People think it's convenient, and to have the technologies that we have nowadays can correct a lot of stuff, can better something that you possibly missed. And I have to say that it rescued my shot a few times. Not saying that I'm all good and master and things like that. But when you're shooting in a location, sometimes it may not play into your favor, depending on lighting angle, where the subject's moving. Because a lot of my clients are not professional models, and I have limited time to direct them to do the photo shoot. So that means that some of this editing will help me to make the photographs more presentable. That's for sure. But if I have all the time I need, I will perfect the image. Then I will possibly move the subject to the correct lighting angle, making sure that that's exactly what I want. The eyes looking in the correct directions, all sorts of stuff. Putting reflector if I need some fill lights on certain things, maybe putting even a rim lights behind by using a projector lights from behind. All kinds of stuff if I really want to make it a master shot. And these are things that you simply cannot do in post.
No, you don't. You can't. No.
Yeah.
No. It's you have to match the result you want with the technique you use to get it. I'm going to sound more guilty of this than most people, just shooting RAW as a quick fix, and then worrying about it later. But it's the wrong way to go about things. Also, I'd like to say in defense of JPEGs, you can edit them. You don't have quite the same leeway, but you can edit them. Um, I tried an experiment a few weeks ago where I just went out shooting in my local area, but made
Yep.
sure that my exposure never lost the brightest part of the sky.
Yep.
So occasion some shots the foreground's a bit dark, but even with the JPEG, I reckon you've got a couple of stops of leeway for bringing out the shadows
Yeah.
before they disintegrate. You haven't got any leeway with highlights, but if you expose just to keep the highlights in with the JPEG, you've got more leeway than you think for getting the shadows back. And similarly, from a theoretical point of view, you might say, well, JPEGs, you fix the white balance, you can't do anything. Well, actually, you can. You can shift the white balance to a surprising degree, not as far as a raw file, but to a surprising degree with a JPEG before it starts to break up. So JPEGs are not uneditable. There is some headroom even in a JPEG.
That there is, and
Just don't push don't you can't push it as far, but
yep.
you can still push them.
But to just to add to that, and I think even with today's or at least recent developments in editing softwares, you can do selective areas, selective colors range, and selective luminance level. So
Yeah.
even if it's JPEG, you can actually selectively do things, makes the JPEG looks a lot better than it is, and so it's actually better with modern technology. So I would say that modern editors are actually better for editing JPEGs, to be honest, and because you can now do things locally, selectively, rather than looking at the whole image. Let's say white balance. You may get the sky completely wrong, but you can actually now select the sky and change the sky colors instead of the foregrounds and all the other stuff. You can also select range of colors and change it. The new Lightroom, I just got updated today. Apparently, the new Lightroom, I haven't tried it yet, has now a much better color selection tool, so you can actually select and collect and change colors.
They would have to be. They would have to be. I just did a post on the lens blur thing, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet.
No. So basically, Lightroom is using AI to try and figure out the 3-dimensional depth in your photographs, and it doesn't do a bad job. It can figure out fairly successfully what's the foreground, what's middle distance, what's background, and blur them.
So I guess this is another interesting thing about AI. It's doing basically fake bokeh and in post, but enhancing it. So like, let's say if you're shooting Micro Four Thirds, for instance, if you think you haven't got enough depth of field, you can use this to try to make it even more blur in the background, and by selecting it. It worked to some extent. I haven't really tried it. I'm probably going to try it in a minute just to see how it looks like. But this is something that I think many of you have talked about before, especially Micro Four Thirds users. I'm more speaking to Micro Four Thirds users. You always say that AI is now mature to the point that it should be able to do something like this to enhance the depth of field if you really want, or to make it shallower if you want to, digitally. So let's say if you got embedded AI in the camera, you can actually select bokeh enhance or depth of field enhance. You can actually dial in like how strong you want the depth of field is going to look like in the camera, so it could record it like this, and it's already helping for the fact that you have some depth of field already, it just may not be strong enough. So it's already got a natural separation in the program, in the frame already. So technically, theoretically, it should be easier for the program to recognize what is the subject, what is not the subject, or background or foreground.
I wouldn't count on it, because Lightroom's masking AI is built around very tight selections. It's selected or it's not selected. It does do some mask softening in some areas I've seen, but right now I think it doesn't really understand progressive blur. The other thing is that we might all get very excited we can create background blur, but I'm pretty sure if we've got background blur in the original, Lightroom's not going to get our detail back. We can't add depth of field. We can take it away, but you can't add it. So but I think there's a danger. We're all going to get obsessed with things we haven't got, whether or not we want them. That's very clever being able to produce quite a realistic background blur, because that's something I've had to do Photoshop tutorials in the past on, and it's really very difficult.
Yep.
So it's I'm very impressed at how well it works. Do I want to do it? Not really, not really. But we become obsessed with the frontiers of
We do.
imaging,
We do.
whether or
Yeah.
not we want them.
Yeah.
So
Well, there are a lot of ways you can create ultra shallow depth of field. You know, one of them is actually in camera. You can do something if you really want to. It's called the Benizer a method that you probably have heard of
oh
it
yeah,
before.
you know, it's quite long-winded.
It's a long-winded thing. It's basically stitching images together, but you can actually achieve something pretty amazing, providing the amount of time you take those photos, the lighting hasn't changed.
Yes.
Yeah, nothing has changed dramatically, so you can still somehow manage to blend the shots together and make it work. And but yeah, there are ways to do it if you really want to do the old school way to make a ultra shallow depth of field shots, and almost making an image look like a large format camera kind of thing. And but there's nothing to take away that you know, if you really want ultra shallow depth of field, you either use an ultra fast lens or move into a bigger format. You know, I think that's naturally
or
the way to
longer
do it. Yes.
longer focal length,
Yes.
and try and get your subject further away from the background. All these things work. It's not just about aperture. There's so many
Yep.
other variables too. But I do think it's a fashion at the moment, ultra shallow depth of field. Maybe we'll eventually get over it. But until
Yep.
we do, we're so obsessed by it.
Yep.
We're getting software developers making AI tools to give
Yep.
it to us. And is it really that important? I guess it must be, or we wouldn't have it. But I'd still think there's this shift away from taking any trouble while taking a picture into the idea that you can do anything with it later, when very often it would have been a lot simpler just to do it right in the first place.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I
take
think
take
who
5
mentioned
seconds
that?
take 5 seconds over the camera settings, not one.
This is called a photographer. You know, they should have done everything in camera. You know,
Well,
because other, you know, when you do something outside the camera, you become an editor, which we all are these days anyway.
yeah.
And but a photographer should have done whatever they want to capture in camera first and make it correctly exposed. Yeah, there may be marginal errors here and there. That's totally fine, if but not totally wrong to start with. We talked about it. If you set the white balance completely wrong, if you stay light, you started putting tungsten, so everything just looked horrible. And the only way to rescue it is you have to shoot in RAW to do it. And alternatively, another thing is if you underexpose a shot by 5 stop, you're not going to rescue it, or over for that matter. And so you got to learn as a photographer, really trying to do everything in camera. Exactly what Chuck actually said in the comments here. Is Gordon Lang wrote a book before, about shooting everything in camera, basically in camera shooting. There's still, I think that's the motto for all photographers, and they should follow it. And I think
I wouldn't argue it out of principle. I'm just arguing it out of practicality. So, for example, you can get all sorts of very clever object removal tools now that take passers-by out of your photographs. Well, yeah. Or when you're taking a picture, you could wait 3 seconds till they move out of the way anyway.
Yeah.
Or you could just ask them. There are all sorts of things we stopped doing as photographers.
Yeah.
That really weren't that difficult. That we're trying to find very technical solutions for.
A great example is that I encounter on a daily basis when I go out and shoot photograph people and family. When I go to a location, when I see rubbish on the floor, just move it instead of just take the shot and remove it later.
I know.
It's a simple thing to do. You just move the rubbish away, and then you can get a clean shot.
When I was a young photographer, I used to think this is all ridiculous. I used to think I used to read tutorials where people would shoot photographs of flowers and then have a spray just to spray some water droplets on the petals. And I think, I can't possibly do that. That's far too difficult. And another landscape photographer might say in an article, oh, there was a bin or a crisp packet or a newspaper in the scene. So I went over and moved it. And then in my youth, I would think, I can't imagine myself doing that. But then it's I
Yeah.
don't I don't know why I thought that way. It's so obvious. So now if I see an interesting piece of driftwood on a beach and there's an awkwardly placed stick,
Yep.
or there's a bit of rubbish, or there's something else that's stopping it working, I'll just go over and shift it. 5 seconds, and you've done it. And
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
5 seconds in a scene rather than 5 minutes in an editor trying to find the best object removal tool and cloning technique to do
Yeah.
exactly the same job.
Yeah.
And there's probably I wouldn't be surprised if Scarlett soon have a Luminar extension for newspaper removal that would do it for me. But the fact is that very often there are so many things you can do on the spot as a photographer
You know
that are
what?
much more practical than doing them later.
I think very soon one company is going to come up with an AI plugin or something. It's called Me Mode. Yeah. So
Yeah.
basically, you take a photograph of yourself in a crowded environment. It basically look for you and remove everything else.
It's well, I think Insta 360s, 360 cameras have a Me mode, so
Yes.
it will find you and track you. It won't get
Yes.
rid of everyone else, but
No,
sadly,
but the thing is, with all this AI removal nowadays, and it wouldn't
yeah.
surprise me one day is that thing would happen. Just say, okay, I don't have to get up 6 o'clock in the morning just to go to a Big Ben to take a photo of just me in a Big Ben. No, I can take it in bright daylight, noontime, and they're packed with tourists. I just hit a button, everybody disappears.
Well, what it will do is it will generate a stock rendering of Big Ben and put you in front of it. So
Yep.
it won't necessarily remove anyone. It'll insert
It may, but then
background that you
again,
want.
it's all about machine learning, right? And then so if you feed enough images into the library or the AI's brain, so it knows how the surrounding environment looks like, perhaps, and then it would just based on those details and re-render an image. And it's almost like human imagination. So the AI is imagining the place with no people in it, but you know how Big Ben and surrounding looks like if you got a memory, and then you just kind of imagine that's what it's going to look like. It could be an interesting tech. I'm pretty sure someone's in the work now. Yeah, everything is AI nowadays, and you can remove this and that altogether. It's scary. It's scary, and I don't think that is photography. Like I said, is more to do being an artist to do certain things and Chuck just say digital vacations. pretty much that is.
I think most of us, much of the year, that's the only kind of vacation we get, imagining places we might go to. So it seems only a small step to then just putting a picture of yourself on it. But you could go in Affinity Photo, which has a stock panel, which is linked to Pixabay. And another one, Pixabay, I think. So you could just, if you wanted to be at the Grand Canyon, just get a stock shot of the Grand Canyon and then drop yourself in. It doesn't need too much AI to do it. It might need AI to do some nice masking and relighting, but it's not rocket science.
No,
I think this is mostly what people want.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Well, what most consumer wants, I would say consumer, not necessarily photographers, but they just want to see a nice photo of themselves in a nice grand location. And that's for sure. And that's exactly what Google Pixel is doing now. And but anyway, I think it's an interesting thing that we should explore, later, because AI is obviously becoming bigger and topic. Whether people consider that as a photography, whether people think that it is something that they should learn more about, and certainly from the commercial side, I can see the pluses, and then like something that I do, and if there is something that really obstructing the photo, making it look horrible, then those tools are valuable, and especially given the limited time I have with the clients at any one time. So that could be a life-saving shot that I could have, just because of one thing might suddenly jump in front of the camera, and that's the only frame I have. Having some sort of AI removal or enhancement could potentially save that shot for me, and that means I can still get paid for it. So that is not a difficult a decision to make. But anyway, and very good. I think that we should reserve this as a much bigger discussion perhaps next time. And I know Chuck already talked about Topaz AI, Photo AI, and many of you are learning about a lot of AI programs because actually, you know, there are AI in every single software these days, and I can't see them disappearing. And in fact, it's going to be increasing more and more features involving AI. Lightroom, you know, we just talked about Fate Bokeh is coming to Lightroom, so I still have to try it out to see what it looks like.
It's here. It's here.
Yeah. And so it's going to be interesting. Now we've got Fate Bokehs in mainstream software. I want to see how many people are going to use that feature. It's going to be really interesting.
It's been around in plugins for a long time. It's just Lightroom's approach is a bit more intelligent.
I think Topaz has it, right? Topaz has a Fate Bokeh or something, and it isolates the subject and actually changed the bokeh. And
the thing is with fake stuff, it generally looks fake, and the question is whether a fake thing is still good enough. But
yeah, we say that now, but like, you know, when digital photography first came about, and we always say that digital can never look as good as film. You know, we could never do this.
And we were right. We were right.
So there you go, you know, and that wraps up, I guess, today's talk, and very good to be back. But just before everybody goes, and just to let you guys know that I'll be off for 2 weeks, so and I'll be in Hong Kong. So anyone in Hong Kong, if you want to meet me, please do get in touch with me, and you can DM me through my contacts in the YouTube page or anything else. If you want to talk about anything more specific, and please also drop some comments below in the video later after this is finished, or now actually you can do some comments. And anything you want to learn about and when you talk about in terms of photography, please give us a shout, and we're very happy to look into it and have some discussions and maybe fun chat about it. That's all good. So anyway, thank you very much for everybody. And if any new gears you want us to show you guys, maybe in the next few months, if you do have something to show you guys, we could potentially arrange something. And of course, we can't show you off the book, you know, you have to be already announced. So, and just something that Rod and I maybe talked about. Maybe we can actually do some showcase and start talking about certain cameras and certain lenses. We can talk a little bit about that live as well if you wanted to do that. So yeah, we just open to any discussion to see whatever you like to hear, whatever you like to discuss and talk about. We're here for you. So good. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. And one last thing before you go. I just got the announcement from YouTube. Remember previously, everything we do here, we recorded also as a podcast. So in the US, you can use the YouTube Music app to listen to us in audio terms. So it becomes a basically audio podcast. This feature is now enabled in the UK, and I think some other countries too. So that means that now you can just open up a YouTube Music app and listen to us rather than seeing the whole videos on YouTube. If you don't want to see our faces, just want to listen to it, you now have the option just to open the YouTube Music app and subscribe to the playlist, and then basically it become a podcast episode. So you can just listen and select which episode you want to listen to, just listen to rather than, seeing our faces, lovely faces. Okay. Anyway, thanks a lot, Rod, and nice to see you again. And I know it's only 1 week, and we're off for another 2 weeks, but I'm sure it's going to be better when we come back. I may have some new stuff to show you guys when I come back, so stay tuned for that as well. So I'll be doing some shopping when I'm in Hong Kong, so I don't know what I'm going to get yet, so it may surprise you. Anyway, and see you guys all later, and until next time, see you soon. Bye for now.